you very much. Thank you very much, Candy. And thank you, everybody. One of the things I love coming here because I do a lot of speaking sort of around. And there are very few places, in fact, I don't think any other place that I have ever done a talk that I get the kind of appreciation and welcome and to be treated just really, really well, the way I am when I come to Toastmasters, or PMUT specifically. So thank you for inviting me. The other thing that I like to do when I come here, and you guys, like, if anybody is here has seen me talk before, you know, I like to try different stuff. And one of the things when I do presentations is I'm like prepared up the yin yang. I will like do my slides up like weeks in advance, and I'll like have them all organized, and I'll like practice and I'll rehearse. And it's like, okay, so every time I do a talk, I know exactly what I'm going to say. There are no surprises. I am like fully supported. And I feel safe and comfortable. But the problem is, of course, that's not necessarily realistic. And when I come to Toastmasters, I like to try to, you know, throw the slides away. So every time I do this, I get a little bit better, but it also freaks me the hell out every time. So I've not prepared any slides today. I have run this thing through my head like 100 times over the last 48 hours, but I am probably still going to screw it up. Fortunately, I'm in a place that I feel very, very safe. So thank you for allowing me to do this. Okay, so the topic for tonight's speech is getting back after COVID, or sort of navigating the uncertainty after COVID. And this was a topic, you know, I agreed to, I think, what, like a month and a half ago, Carrie. Carrie suggested, why don't you talk about that? And I thought, oh, what, that's a really, really good idea. You know, it's something that we're all kind of dealing with, we're all kind of struggling with. Why don't I put something together on that? And then, of course, you know, that was a month and a half ago, and I got all this time to prepare the talk, right? So I went off and I did other stuff, and, you know, periodically my calendar would remind me, Geoff, you need to get this organized. So eventually I sat down and I was like, okay, so what's this going to be about? And in my head, I guess it was kind of like, well, obviously we've just come through this 2.5 years of nutty, right? We had our lives, we did the things that we did every day, and then we got the call, everybody has to go home. Everybody has to go back, go and start working from home and learning how to use Zoom and doing all of that stuff. And I guess when, you know, 2.5 years later, everybody's tired of it for a lot of different reasons at a lot of different levels. And people are saying, well, okay, let's go back to the way things were. And I think what's in a lot of people's minds is that, okay, so how we did all of this stuff, we kind of like rolled people home to work from home. We're just going to undo that. And we're just going to go back to the way things were exactly as we left them. And of course, that's not very realistic, is it? And this is the thing, this is the narrative, but this is the narrative that is sort of prevails when we talk about going back to work. Oh, it's just an undoing of what happened before. So to talk about this effectively, what is uncertainty after COVID? It's not COVID. COVID is one thing that happened. It is one part of a reality of this like merry-go-round slash roller coaster slash I don't know what the hell it is. But it's been a ride. And COVID has been a part of it. But if we're going to understand what this ride is, how we're going to sort of move forward from this time period, we kind of have to get a grip on what this big thing is, what this ride is that we've been on. And COVID is only a part of it. Now, for the first little bit of the talk, I just want to preface, I am going to talk about some things that might be a little bit difficult. And it's important because I believe it's all part of this big story. I am going to eventually move off of it and it's going to get lighter. But I think as part of the initial part of the talk, we kind of need to face a couple of things about what's going on in the world. Right. So if I have your permission to do that, then the pandemic happened. I think it kind of started for us in early 2020. I remember the day that I went off work was March 15th, 2020. Before that, you know, it had been kind of building. I remember sitting in a restaurant about a week before I got the call that I had to go home. And I remember sitting in that restaurant and feeling a little weird. Like I was looking around like, I wonder, does anybody have this? Right. Like it was it wasn't like existential angst, but it was kind of like this low grade, I haven't felt this before. But when that happened, we had already been on a ride that started a few years before. It's probably started a long time ago, but when I really remember things starting to get nutty was in around 2016. I wonder what happened that year. And okay, so a lot of stuff started to happen. And one of the things that I noticed was that the news cycle started to accelerate. Obviously, a lot of stuff, the news was coming from the States, it was coming from south of the border, but it was coming at us at a pace in my 53 years I have never ever seen before. Right? I mean, I'm not like a news junkie. Well, I am now because, it's just survival. But once upon a time, I was not a news junkie. I would just kind of I would be aware of things. I would vote when it was convenient. I would do that kind of stuff, but I wasn't like particularly civic minded. But when the news started to pick up speed and the stories that I was looking at, I was like, did that just happen? Seriously? Oh, there's a hurricane heading for Alabama. No, there isn't. Yes, there is. No, there isn't. Yes, there is. People are going to die if you don't get this right, right? And that led to another story and another story and another story. I don't know. Did anybody here watch Randy Rainbow during the Trump years? Did anybody watch those videos? Yeah, like they're freaking awesome. You watch them and he's got his finger on this nerve that is just the craziness of what is going on in the world. But even Randy Rainbow, even his videos were really geared around just one aspect of the world. And that was sort of the Trump years and the Trump train and crazy things that were happening south of the border. But then these stories, they started coming faster and faster and faster. And then one day in 2020, the story turned to this pandemic, which was coming out. But remember, it didn't happen on the heels of nothing. It wasn't like we were all sitting around enjoying, a mint julep, and then all of a sudden, oh, there's a pandemic. It happened on the heels of this crazy, crazy accelerated news cycle. And then it was like, okay, fine. We're all having to move home and we have to learn how to use Zoom. And there were good things and there were bad things, right? So like there were bad things that everybody's anxiety ratcheted up by a factor of 50 or 100. There was the fact that all of a sudden, we didn't really know how to navigate this new world. Really convenient things that we took for granted, like walking down the hall and talking to Marcia in accounting with a little quick question I have. You can't do that anymore without booking an appointment on Zoom. And it was just this weird kind of crazy world. At the same time, we also got to eliminate, a lot of us got to eliminate our commutes. A lot of us got to spend more time with family. We got to sleep in a little bit longer and the nature of our days kind of changed. And we got used to that. All right. What else happened during the pandemic? Over that 2.5 years, we saw things like the insurrection down in the States. Yeah, that's new, right? Haven't had to deal with that before. We saw things like Roe versus Wade getting overturned like that. And it's like, wait, no, that's been around for 50 years. You don't get to touch that, right? But we saw the war start with Ukraine and Russia, just like thing after thing after thing after thing. And it just always seemed to be bad. But other things happened during the pandemic as well. For example, we got to welcome Generation Z into the workforce. And this was cool and crazy at the same time, right? We all remember, I think, the jokes about millennials versus boomers, right? Those are flying around well before the pandemic, talking about avocado toast and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then Gen Z enters the workforce. And it's like, okay, anything you thought about, people being at work, yeah, throw that right out the window because you don't know anything, right? I'm teaching, I work at a university and I'm teaching students who were not alive for when the Twin Towers came down. They have never known a world when you make an application to a company, right? Like say, I want a job with you. You might get a letter that says, thank you for your application. We're taking it seriously. You might even get a rejection letter that says, thank you very much for your time. But you know what? We're not actually going to proceed with your application. Thank you for letting me know that. Yeah, that's all gone. But the thing is, for everybody here, we all kind of knew this world once upon a time. So when we engaged with the workplace, we kind of were respectful. We treated it with, sort of reverence and kind of well, I need to demonstrate that I am worth their time. And Gen Z has never, ever, ever known that. They've only known a world where recruiters kind of treat them like crap, right? So they're coming and they're like, well, okay, fine. If you're going to treat me this way, I'll treat you right the same way right back. Like why wouldn't I do that? So they don't show up to work sometimes. They accept a job and they just, oh, you know what? I got something better. And it's like, how do I deal with this? And this is like a problem. This is like a problem like for everybody, because people are trying to figure out, how do I interact with this? Like, I don't even know the rules of the game, right? All of this stuff happened while we were home, while the pandemic was raging. And it's like, you know, we saw the Great Resignation. We saw all kinds of like seismic upheavals in the way the world of work worked. Okay, that was a little weird phrasing, but you know what I mean, right? And now there is this ask that says, okay, all right, pretend none of that happens. Pretend none of that happened. Okay, we're just going to go back to exactly the way things were when we left. And it's like, are you guys on crack? Right? Like, this isn't going to happen, right? So we have to kind of figure out some way to navigate all of this. There are other problems too. I actually looked this up. So apparently between 2000 and like 2020, when the pandemic happened, there was a change in the physical office spaces, I guess. So one of the things we are all used to, closed off private offices around the perimeter of an office space, and then inside there's lots of cubicles, so you kind of have privacy but not really. And then starting in 2000, they took that away. So you basically have, in a lot of offices, just complete open concept. And the size of a desk went from 48 square inches down to 36 square inches, right? So like space, like desk space real estate shrank by 25%. So, and that was fine, right? We kind of accepted that, and it's like, yeah, whatever, it's neat. We get to see each other better. We can have, you know, more impromptu conversations. But then COVID hit, and it's like, okay, no, socially distance, socially distance, socially distance. You have to space everybody out. And it's like, dude, but I got to go back to my desk, and I'm like practically breathing my droplets in the guy next to me's coffee cup, right? So like, how are we going to deal with that? And everybody is asking these same kinds of questions. And when I stopped to think about it, okay, you know, so Carrie had asked me, you know, uncertainty after COVID, and it started out with just this like one little thing, and it exploded. It just like mushroomed in my head of all the different things that we actually have to contend with to leave this place where we're at and move forward from here. How on earth are we going to do that? And what is the real problem? And so you guys know that, you know, I study psychology. That's my kind of main thing. And what occurred to me was the big deal, the big thing that overarches all of this is the perception of control that we all had once upon a time has absolutely been shattered, right? It's kind of like the metaphor that I got in my head was kind of like, you know, those walkways at the airport. You get in the walkway and it's kind of like moves you forward, and there's like little you know, like elevator music playing, and it's all peaceful and soothing, and you're moving forward at a nice, comfortable pace with your luggage, right? This whole last 2.5 years, it's like somebody went to the back of that, grabbed the end, and went wugga, 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 and everything on that conveyor belt just is like flying all over the place. And we perceived that reality was a certain way. We perceived that things were nice and comfortable, and, you know, maybe they were a little bumpy every once in a while, but we kind of knew what to expect. We kind of knew what to do. We had a perception of control over our lives, and that has been completely upended. And what do we do now? I do a lot of talks when I'm talking about psychology. I will talk about the brain, and I will talk about the body. And one of the things that I will talk about is the autonomic nervous system. So you guys might be familiar with this already. So our bodies are divided into a network of different structures, all of which respond to electrochemical signals throughout our body in different ways depending on the situation. So the autonomic nervous system is divided into the sympathetic, which is the fight or flight system, and the parasympathetic, which is the rest and digest system. And I want you to imagine that you are a zebra. You are a zebra on the savannah somewhere, and you're hanging it by the watering hole, and you're just chilling, and you're drinking your water, and you're making little zebras, and maybe eating some grass. And then along comes a lion, and that lion is absolutely hell-bent on eating you. So what do? You don't hang out there, right? You actually you buck and you run, 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 and you run. And eventually you're fast enough, you outrun the lion, right? Yay, good for you. Now, what do you do next? Well, do you sit and dwell on it? Do you just stress out over the fact that, oh my God, a lion almost ate me? No, you go back to drinking water and eating grass and maybe making little zebras, because that's what zebras do, right? Now, zebras don't have 3 kids they're trying to put through university. Zebras don't have credit card bills that they have to deal with. Zebras aren't worried about just deciding between the mortgage payment or the car payment this month, right? Zebras don't have those problems. So as a consequence, zebras, their stress levels will go up and their stress levels will come right back down to nothing, and they're totally fine. Human beings aren't like that. And now there is a structure in the brain. It's actually a multiple structure. Well, obviously lots of structures in the brain, but the one in particular I'm thinking about is called the amygdala. And it is basically responsible for activating the sympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system. It is the thing that triggers the fight or flight reflex. Now, the way this thing works is it sort of sits there and it has to make a decision based on the information that it's getting. Do I need to freak out, or do I need to just sort of back off and chill? And one of the things that we know the amygdala is very, very, very sensitive to are new things, new situations we've never encountered before, and situations where we see a vast, vast, vast unknown. Think for a minute about, has anybody here tried to learn a new language? Right? Just randomly, I'm going to learn Sanskrit or something. Okay, yeah. So what happens? You sit down and you go to your first lesson. You're all super excited. Yeah, I'm going to learn Sanskrit. It's going to be super cool. I'm going to get to do this and this and this and this. I can travel here, and I can I can order tchotchkes in Sanskrit. Yay for me! And you go to do that, and then you go to your first lesson, and it's like, wow, I really don't know a lot yet, do I? But you learn how to say a couple things. And then in the second class, you learn how to say a couple more things. And in the third class, you can learn to say a couple more things, but you also start to realize how much of this Sanskrit you don't know. You look at this vastness of oh my God, it's really a lot of stuff. And then what happens? Well, for a lot of people, you don't go to the fourth lesson. It just kind of yeah, you know what, I'll pick that up in a couple weeks. And then you just never go back to it. Right. So if you actually decided to stick it out, good for you. You get a pat on the back. But for a lot of us, when it comes to learning something like that, you see this vastness, you see this chasm of things that you don't know what to do with. And it's well, I'm checking out, count me out. I'm not dealing with this. Quitting smoking. If anybody has ever tried to do that, it's the same exact thing. Part of the anxiety of quitting smoking is looking into the future and seeing somebody that you don't recognize. I don't know who that is, and I don't know how I'm going to get there. It's too far, it's too much, it's too big. The amygdala sees that and goes, boom. And what happens? As soon as it does, the sympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system kicks in. Fight or flight kicks in. And now we're stressed. And now we're flooding our bodies with cortisol, and we're getting anxious. Now, this group of people in particular, I would expect this to resonate with more than other groups I might give this talk to. And why is that? Well, I'm not 100% sure, but I believe that everybody in this club is either a project manager or is connected to project management in some way. Is that an accurate statement? Yeah. Okay. So here's the thing about living and working in the project space. One of the fundamental principles about the work that we do is that we are responsible for managing risk. Does risk live in the past? No. Does risk live in the present? No. Risk lives in the future. And how good are we at projecting ourselves into the future to develop and design mitigation plans? We do it because we're project managers. This is what we do, right? We might not be right, we might not be accurate, but we can very, very quickly project ourselves into the future to think through plans that we might have to deal with and design mitigations around. Okay, where do our worries live? Where do our anxieties live? Past, present, or future? 100% in the future. Right? So what do we do? What do we as project managers do? In the course of our jobs, we put ourselves on purpose, cheek by jowl, next to our worries every day. Right? If anybody understands anxiety, project managers do. And I know this because I was one and I used to lose a lot of sleep. So but this is important, right? I mean, if we are going to be a body of people who is going to move from here and find our way back, well, first of all, we have to give up the illusion that we ever had control to begin with, right? If anybody has pets and you picked up your pet, does the pet go, hey, stop picking me up? Oh my God, what's going on? Call, I need an adult. They don't say that. They just go, oh, I'm being picked up now. Okay, I'll wait till I get put down, I guess, right? Because they can make that switch. It's like, oh, I'm in control. Oh, no, I'm not in control now. Okay, oh, wait. In control again, yay, right? Human beings, especially people who work as project managers, we're really bad at this, generally speaking. And if we want to get away from here, if we want to find ourselves in the new reality, whatever the new reality is going to look like, then there's some things that we're going to have to do for ourselves, right? And the first one is to sort of like recognize, right? Alcoholics Anonymous absolutely had the right idea when it was like, recognize what you actually can control and what you can't. And there are a lot of things that we can't control, and we just kind of have to recognize that. That's just something that we have to learn to do, and it's very difficult. But we can make it a little bit easier with a couple things. So one of them is practicing gratitude. Has anybody ever tried this? Has anybody ever had it that somebody just randomly comes up to you, like somebody you know, right? It's not like a complete rando off the street, but somebody that you know comes up to you and says, you know what? I just wanted to say I am really, really thankful for all the things that you've done for me. And here's what they are. I'm thankful for this and this and this and this, and just thank you for being there for me. Has anybody ever just had that happen, like in the middle of the day? It's not very common. Right? It's not something that we normally expect. I did actually have a student come up to me today and say something really, really nice out of the blue. And it was like, oh, that's really cool. Thanks. Right? What happens when something like this happens? We feel this kind of rush of warmth. Well, for the person who's actually delivering the gratitude, it's actually even better. Because what happens is when you demonstrate, when you go to someone and you tell them that you are thankful and you're specific about why, right? The reaction that you get actually triggers something called oxytocin, a release of oxytocin, which is, you may have heard as the love hormone. And it doesn't mean like it's kind of like, like creepy love. It's just this good rush of good interpersonal connection feeling that comes from the release of oxytocin. It makes us feel peaceful and connected. And one of the things that research shows that we really, really need in times of uncertainty is connection to other people. We need the sense that we are not alone in dealing with the things that we are dealing with. Project managers, we can be really tough on ourselves, right? We can separate ourselves away from everybody else and say we're the ones that are shouldering all of the responsibility, when in fact, that is something that can be shared, right? Routines become something really, really important. When we know what to expect over the course of a day, there is a comfort that comes from that. And one of the things, I know when the pandemic first hit and I was sort of thrust home, my job is kind of weird. So I don't have any real structure. It's a very emergent kind of job at the university. I teach, but I also have a lot of other things that I have to do. And it was just kind of like I was moving like haphazardly from one thing to the next, and it was stressing me right out, right? I just didn't know how to deal with it because all of the things that I had taken for granted, like even just the commute to work, right? That was something I did at the same time in the same way every single day. It was something I could count on. I didn't enjoy it, but I knew what was coming. And it meant that at least for some of my day, I could count on a big piece of it being the same. When I was thrust home, all of a sudden, all of those routines were gone. And it got really, really difficult for a while. But then I started to build routines back in. And it was something that just kind of happened naturally. And I suspect for most of you, that would have happened as well, right? It's just something that we do. But when all of a sudden there's a big seismic shift in how we're doing our work, which is what's coming when we have to go back to the way things were, or try to anyway, there are going to be some big changes. And coming up with those routines is going to be absolutely, absolutely important. And I guess the last thing, it's 7:55, so I don't want to go over, but the last thing I wanted to say is something that my grandmother used to always say. And I know it sounds kind of schmaltzy, but what she used to say whenever I was really upset was, "This too shall pass." And it was always true. Excuse me. It was always true. And it was something that I knew, as long as I had the patience to sit through it, I knew that this too shall pass was something that I could always count on. And so it made it not so bad. That is it that I have for you today. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer them.